Hi, my name is Ryan Sloan, and I want to welcome you to this episode of The Gear Cage. And in this particular episode, we're actually going to go back and continue to build on what we were talking about in part one of our Dante series. So if you haven't seen that one yet, you might want to go back and check that out, because we do talk more about what Dante is and how it works and things you can do with it in that particular video. But I thought in part two, before we get more advanced in part three and do things like live plugins with Waves Multi-Rack, I thought we would just show a very basic Dante setup in this video. So we're going to do that in this video. We're actually going to just show audio coming back from a computer into two separate sources. So we are going to multicast the signal out to two different locations. I'll show you the Dante Via software and setting up Dante Controller and using multiple devices and routing the inputs and outputs, in particular on the X32, to and from a Dante network. So without further ado, let's dive into it. And again, don't forget, if you do have any questions, be sure to ask me. So as we go here, we can see, hello, test one, test two. We can see that particular old, very old SM58 microphone that I probably had about 25 years down there. But one thing I do want to talk about as we're here is just routing those signals through the console. And it's easier on an X32 than you think, although it can be intimidating at first. So as we're routing channels back and forth, we're actually going to head up to our menu here. All right, so you can see that here. And how you're routing things back and forth on an X32 is just with the routing menu. So that talks about everything. Right now we're on the card out option, which actually does relate to Dante specifically. This is actually showing us what we're sending out on the Dante network right now on our 32 outputs. But let's start on the home screen, because this is actually where we're going to pull things back in from the computer here momentarily. So you can see on inputs 1 through 8 here that it's set up for local 1 through 8. So that's why the microphone was live just now, because it is actually on input 2 locally on inputs 1 through 8. Now, if you look next at inputs 9 through 16, you'll actually see that card 1 through 8 is what is being fed to channels 9 through 16 on the Behringer board. So that means as we go back on the board here and take a look, when I hit 9 through 16, we're actually going to be getting Dante 1 through 8 back from the computer once we're done here on the console itself. So that gives you an idea of how it's working. So we can see that we can route all of our input sources either locally or from snakes or from the Dante card itself. You can see on here, we've got all other local I/O right now technically, but on the card out, so this is what the card is sending out into the network. We can see that we have local 1 through 8, local 9 through 16, but on the last 16 outputs, we're actually routing a snake, if it were hooked up right now, to the Dante network. So that allows us to send 32 channels back into a computer for recording or for processing, where we can then bring them back. So hopefully that all makes sense. Now, let's actually cut over to the computer. You can see our computer here, and in fact, I'm going to switch you over to an actual screenshot here now. So here we go. We're getting ready to start that here in just a second. All right, here you go. So you are live on the screen now. So as we're recording here, first of all, you can see our Pro Tools session here. We'll minimize that. We're actually recording to Pro Tools simultaneously here. But we're just going to play some audio actually from Safari of all things. So it's kind of an interesting thing that we can do with this is actually to play from Safari through a network. And let's start actually with Dante Controller. So let's open up that real quick here. So this is actually the program, Dante Controller is the program that shows us what all of our inputs and outputs are doing at a glance. You'll see it listed in two ways. You have Dante receivers and you have Dante transmitters. And just like our wireless sound discussion here, it works the same way. So a receiver is receiving channels from a transmitter. And right now on the network, we have two transmitters specifically, the X32 Console, as well as the Macbook Pro here. So we can see as we're looking here and we drop this grid out that the Safari right and left outputs are going right now to the Focusrite RedNet AM2, but they're also, like I said, being multicast to the X32 at the same time. So you can see both the left and right Safari output going to the same locations and destinations. We can also drop the MacBook here just so you can see where all that's going. So you can see it's pretty easy to do this, and you do have two separate views. You also have a device view that you can go to. And here we can, for instance, pull up the Focusrite RedNet AM2 and see the sources. So for instance, if I wanted to have that SM58 get routed to the left output of the Focusrite, I simply drag it here and release it. And within just a second, while it propagates through the network, boom, that microphone is now routed to the output of the Focusrite just that quickly with just a quick click here and a click there. So pretty impressive what you can do there. Now let's go ahead and move it back over to the Safari left output for our demonstration here. So that is the Dante Controller. Next we have Dante Via, which is part of the Audinate software packages. They have Dante Via and Dante Virtual Soundcard. For recording purposes, like recording directly into Pro Tools, you'll usually use Dante Virtual Soundcard most of the time for something like that. But Dante Via lets you route program-specific audio to any source on a Dante network. So for instance, I can route the audio from this over to ScreenFlow on the capture. I can route things from Pro Tools all over the place. I can route things from Safari all over the place, like we're going to do now. So let's just take a listen and show the network in action here. This song will be from an artist friend of mine. We just actually finished his record called Hype Beast. And these are some of the songs from that. But you'll see we'll be able to play this song through the network and through multiple devices. And one thing you want to do when this is happening is actually make sure you turn the telestream audio capture off and move it to Dante Via. That's always helpful. Now you can hear it coming out of the laptop specifically. But we can also move that over to the console now. So as we're looking at the console now, we can actually see that it is actually indeed returning on channels 9 and 10 on the console. We're going to turn it down a little bit. So we can see it returning to channels 9 and 10 on the X32 console, just like we had programmed it to, because it is leaving on channels 1 and 2 of the Dante network. Now, if we switch back to input channels 1 through 8, we'll see that the microphone here is still hello, 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 unaffected basically, and still working as it always has. So I hope that shows you a little bit about how to set up your Dante network and the components involved and some of the software involved and what you can do. Like I mentioned, stay tuned for part 3 because in part 3 we're actually going to go over a more real world setup here with Waves multi-rack. So we're actually going to set it up so that that microphone will actually go through the Dante network, the console, into the computer through Waves multi-rack, which will process plugins in real time, and then shoot it back over to the console on a separate input for a completely different sound, actually. It's a good way to upgrade the sound of your console dramatically using Waves processing. So a very, very popular topic these days. So stay tuned for that one, and be sure to put any questions again down in the comments, and we'll be happy to address them in section 3. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Ryan Sloan, and we'll talk to you again soon.